Hello, beautiful people. I hope everybody's doing well for a Tuesday evening. Today, I am so excited to bring up this next guest. But before I bring her in, I'm going to first just little housekeeping rules here, or not rules, but some announcements. Do not forget, please plan for the big HAPI premiere this Saturday, July 18th at 7 p.m. and that's Eastern Standard Time. Okay, Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. on Saturday. Please get your tickets, grab your family, sit down, get some snacks from Black-owned businesses, get some snacks, sit down, and watch this film and be inspired. And you will learn so much more, and you will be able to build upon what you already know. It's a beautiful film. Just go to hapifilm.com to get your tickets. And also, while you're there, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. We disseminate a newsletter every month at the beginning of the month, which includes 5 different things. And sometimes you add some extra stuff, but we always profile a Black-owned business. We talk about an economic innovator from the past that helped us to get where we are now. We always give some HAPI updates. We do a financial 101 type of thing. And we have a young 13-year-old boy from Georgia who writes an article about health. So please go to hapifilm.com, get your tickets, and also sign up for the newsletter. And one more thing, when you buy your ticket for the awesome HAPI premiere on Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at the end, we're going to have a panel discussion only for ticket holders. So you'll be sent a link around 9 o'clock. You hit the link and you'll be into the Zoom panel discussion with a bunch of the cast members. So please get your tickets and be inspired. All right, so my next guest, who is a HAPI cast member, this woman is so awesome. And I was so happy when I was looking at the film and you see her pop in and she tells you so really good information that not everybody knows. And she really talks a lot about the queens and goddesses of the Nile. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Solange Ashby, Egyptologist. Yay!
Hi.
Let me tell you, I need to get some applause. King Simon has applause on his show. I need to get something, going on over here. So welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, I was going to ask you this question, but then I was like, no, you got to answer this question, on the actual show. How many Black Egyptologist women are there?
As far as I know, it is myself at this point, and Dr. Raketi Amen. So we are the two, although I'm happy to say that I am in contact with a group of Black scholars, but within that group, several Black women who are busy writing dissertations and will very shortly be becoming PhDs in the field. So,
wow. Okay, wait. Wow, there's only 2, and those 2 are in HAPI's film. Like both of you guys are in there.
Wow. I do have to give a shout out to Dr. Andreas Wood, who got his PhD at Brown University. He's unfortunately no longer in the field, but he preceded both of us to be the first Black American Egyptologist, which is amazing.
Yeah, this is pretty amazing in the year 2020. Wow.
Pretty crazy.
Wow. So you have such a you can make this role anything you want. Like you can do whatever you want in this field. That's what's up. So let's just take a step back. So how did you even think about Egyptology? Like how did that come about?
I sort of came at it sideways, reading Greek mythology, reading a biography of Alexander the Great, who conquered Egypt. And I thought, oh, I never knew there was any ancient history in Africa. I mean, this is how it's not taught in public school.
Yep.
But becoming aware of that, then fast forward, I was visiting my mom while she was living in New Orleans and walked by a bookstore in the French Quarter. and saw Black Athena by Martin Bernal. And I thought, I definitely did a double take on that book and went in and promptly bought it. It's about this thick.
Wow.
And sat down and read the entire thing. And it just got me very interested to know more about ancient Egypt. Several years later, I was living in Oakland, and I was able to take classes through the adult education school at University of California, Berkeley. And so that was just the taste that got me hooked. You're on me.
Oh, yeah, no. But you know why? Because I live in Harlem, and there's always some type of little music in the background. You always see me go on mute because it's so much drama on the street. It's like, oh my, and it only starts at 7:00 when we're having HAPI Talks. It never fails. It never
Excellent.
But wow. Okay, but before you got to like doing, like getting a doctorate in Egyptology, what were you doing like before? Like, what was your education piece before that?
It's very funny. I went to college early. So I started college in Western Massachusetts as a 16-year-old, right after 11th grade. Yes. And then I went to graduate school very late. So I began my doctoral program at University of Chicago when I was 39 years old and 12 weeks pregnant with my first child. So that was crazy. In between, I was kind of a globe-trotting backpacker girl. And so I came back to the States and I would work and get money and then just run off and travel as much as I could.
Oh, that's the best education.
I loved it. Yeah. I loved it. I learned a lot.
Wow. Okay. All right. So now you're in Egyptology school. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And you were at University of Chicago, which is interesting because we had a couple of scholars from there that was also in HAPI, talking. But so when you were in the program, like what were the challenges, if any, was it, being like the only Black woman, so it seemed
absolutely.
Like,
yes.
So they're not even used to seeing you.
No, there was pretty much no diversity the whole time I was there. I remember being in a Demotic class. So this is a late phase of the Egyptian language. And there was a young Black woman who came over from classics because she thought she would just come pick up Demotic, but it doesn't work that way. And it's a really difficult script to read. And so she didn't last very long. And that was kind of it for me seeing any Black folks when I was there. The other challenge is that I was the mother of two very young children, and I don't recommend that to anyone. I, am incredibly stubborn, so I got through, but it was hard.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like when you have a lot on your plate, it almost makes it easier to get stuff done because you don't have an option to just say, oh, I don't feel like doing it now. It's like, okay, I only have 2.5 hours to finish this paper. So it's it helps you sort of focus.
Spoken like a mother. Multitasking. There's no time to play around. Every single hour was scheduled and blocked out. I still work like that because I still have kids. So I schedule an hour and I'm going to write this paper during that 1 hour.
Yeah. It really helps to almost focus you. It does, like in a weird way, but it is a lot of work.
Yeah.
All right. So now, what did you do your thesis on? Or I'm sorry, not your thesis, your dissertation. What did you do?
Yeah. So I wrote about prayer inscriptions from the Temple of Philae at the traditional southern boundary of Egypt. So this is the temple that sits right on an island in the center of the Nile, facing south toward Nubia. And so there are these inscriptions engraved into the stone walls of the temple, and they were engraved amongst the amazing hieroglyphic text and the images there, but you can see in tiny script prayer inscriptions left by visitors from all over, primarily Egyptians, but sometimes from other places outside of Egypt. And then there's a group of about 100 inscriptions that were engraved by Nubians. And so I wrote a 400-page dissertation talking about the 3 phases. There were 3 discrete phases, different kinds of Nubians who came to the temple for different reasons. But all of these inscriptions were engraved between about 35 CE until the last one is 456 CE. So about 400 years just after Christ.
Wow. Did you have much like pushback, with your, you deciding to go on this path?
You know what? The pushback was more internal. I remember asking my advisor, Jan Johnson, who is amazing, am I going to just write myself out of a job by focusing on Nubians instead of Egyptians as an Egyptologist? And she actually really encouraged me to go down that path and write this dissertation. I think partially because the University of Chicago has one of the most amazing collections of Nubian artifacts in the United States. Unfortunately, much of it is down in the basement, although there is a small permanent exhibit in the gallery at the Oriental Institute, which I suggest if you're in the vicinity to visit. But she encouraged me to do this. It had not been done before, and so it was a fascinating subject to look at in depth.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just put a disclaimer. Everyone that's looking at this piece right now, I am going to stop Dr. Solange Ashby every time she says a term I do not understand. Okay, I want to make sure, yes, because I am at Cultural Awareness 101 right now. Okay, so I'm just going to just take one step back before we go forward. You said a term. You said the class that you were sitting in, Demotic.
Demotic, yes.
Okay, so explain to me like what that is.
So it's a late period script. We think of hieroglyphs as traditional Egyptian writing, and that was used throughout all of Egyptian history to decorate monumental structures, temples or tombs. And then the priest used hieratic, so a really cursive script to write on papyrus scrolls, to write down magical spells or prayers, whatever. But then in the late period, so beginning in the 7th century BC, another form of writing developed in Egypt, and this was a business hand. And so the early forms are marriage contracts, leases, business contracts. It's really quite an ugly script. You can't recognize any images like we're used to recognizing a fish, a bird, whatever, a human. You can't recognize any of that in this Demotic script, but it was meant to be very fast, always written from right to left, like Arabic or Hebrew.
Kind of like shorthand.
Yeah, although it fully captured the language. And so it started off as a business script, but in the period that I looked at, this time after Christ, so first to the 5th century CE, it started to be used for religious texts because the priests were starting to lose the ability to read and write hieroglyphs. But they were maintaining the ability to write Demotic. And so we have late period religious texts written in the Demotic script.
Oh, okay. So okay. All right. Okay.
So let me just add that the Nubians that I studied who were leaving prayer inscriptions, most of them were written in Demotic because these Nubians were often trained to be priests, and they were coming and functioning as priests in these Egyptian temples that happened to be located in Nubia. And so they were trained to use the hieroglyphic script, the Demotic script, but they also left inscriptions in Greek, which was the international language of negotiation at that point. and left inscriptions in Meroitic, which was the language of the kingdom further south in what is today Sudan, that has its own separate script.
Okay. So did you have a chance to go there to look at this? I mean, like, so how many times have you been to Egypt or Kemet?
I think 5 times. I really need to tally it up. I think it's been 5 times. I got funding from the University of Chicago to go in 2011 to do research in the Temple of Philae, specifically, and so that was really helpful.
Okay, I remember visiting there. My place is Abu Simbel. Oh my gosh, that's just as soon as you just step into Ramesses temple, it's just like it's all over. Something came over me.
It's magical, and then you're really, really deep in Nubia, right?
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so just as as we're going to kind of take questions sort of from the audience and from questions I kind of prepared all at the same time. Okay. So someone just asked a question just before we kind of move on. Is there a connection between the Demotic and meroitic languages?
Good question. Yeah. So the Meroitic people developed their script based off of the Egyptian script. So they had been using the Egyptian writing in earlier periods because it just was not a thing that was super important for them. But in the Meroitic period, they returned to so many indigenous practices, gods that they worshiped that were no longer gods shared with Egypt. And then at this point, they decided to develop their own script. And so there are 2 Meroitic scripts, a hieroglyphic script that is based on the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and what I'm calling the Meroitic cursive script that's based on the Demotic script.
Okay.
So it was that cursive script that I was referring to when I said that the inscriptions at Philae were written in Meroitic.
Okay, Meroitic. Okay. Is there any text anywhere in that part of Egypt or Nubia that hasn't been translated?
All of the Meroitic stuff is as yet untranslatable. Like they use the script in a way that's kind of like an alphabet, which is very different from how the Egyptians wrote their language. And so we know what each of the individual signs sound like, and so I can sound out the words, but there are a great number of words that are not translatable at this point.
Wow. Okay, so there's more work for somebody.
There is.
Okay. All right. So so you decided, like, why attack? Attack is not the word I mean to use, but why look at Nubia from a religious point of view? Like when you were thinking about getting your dissertation together, all that stuff. Like why go in at and look at religion?
Well, that's the thing. I thought because I was taking this group of inscriptions from a temple that it would be purely religious, but it turns out so much of it is financial negotiations that happen. So I mentioned that there were 3 different groups, 3 different periods in which Nubians came to the temple. And in the first period, that's from about 10 CE until about 55 CE, they're coming as conquered territory. And so different kings from small groups of Nubians are coming, bringing produce from their local areas, and they're making donations at the temple. This all changes really dramatically in this second period when these Nubian priests are being paid by kings and queens in Meroe to come up and perform specific rites at the temple. In this period, we see there's a lot of religious practice that's going on, and I describe the milk libations that seem to be quite unique to the Nubian people, and they're coming to pour those for Osiris as part of his process of being resurrected. But there are also high-level dignitaries from the king in Meroe who are coming to conduct negotiations with their counterparts in Egypt. And so they're talking about pounds and pounds of gold that they're bringing and donating to the temple. They say we are naming a prophet, and so they're crowning or giving power to a high-ranking religious individuals, but they're also doing political negotiations. Who's going to control this part of Nubia? Is it going to be under meroitic control or Egyptian control? And so it's not just religion. There's financial transactions, there's political negotiations.
Wow. Okay.
And partying. One of my favorite inscriptions is about how the king in Meroe sent this big old heavy amount of gold, pounds and pounds of gold, with the explicit instruction that these emissaries arriving at Philae should throw a party for the entire district. And there's going to be lots of drinking and music and dancing. It was just party time when the Nubians arrived.
Wow, a pound of gold and everybody's getting busy. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Okay. This is good. Okay. So now let's talk about the women, okay? Because a lot of, what you have written about, is about the women, of that time. So can you kind of just compare like the rights or just kind of talk about the rights of ancient Egyptian women, like what type of rights did they have back then?
Okay. Yeah, so they were unique for the ancient world, or at least, the part of the ancient world that we think of, Greece and Rome, or the ancient Near East. The women in Egypt had many, many more rights. And so they were able to conduct business, earn their own money. They could inherit money. They had the right to divorce if they were not happy with their husband. In fact, that thing that I referred to as a marriage contract that we see written in Demotic is actually a contract that the husband writes for the wife, that he will provide her with X, Y, and Z every year in terms of cloth, food, housing. And he says, all of the children that you produce for me will be yours. And if this doesn't work out, then your children will still be included in my inheritance. And so it was very, not sort of the fairy tale Cinderella marriage ceremony that we think of, but very kind of cut and dried. What could the woman expect from her husband as a result of this marriage?
Wow, economics. It's economics. Yeah.
So much financial independence for women.
Okay, so like who were were there any women who stood out like in that time frame that you looked at? It's been, because I know you talk a lot about Isis. You actually wrote a book. Yeah, talk about your book too. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. So my book that is coming out now is Calling Out to Isis, the Enduring Nubian Presence at Philae, which is actually my dissertation. And so in that book, I'm describing these 3 phases of Nubian worship at Philae. And so, yeah, Isis is not a woman. She's a goddess, but she was the primary religious figure in this period. She becomes sort of this overarching mother goddess who incorporates many of the other goddesses from Egyptian history. So Hathor and Sekhmet, she just becomes the principal goddess. To talk about important and powerful women, I would have to shift us further south to Kush. And so you said you wanted me to say what is Kush.
Yeah.
I like to say just most simply that we can call the territory from the 1st to the 4th or 5th cataract of the Nile Nubia. So this is the area from that Temple of Philae as the southern Egyptian border, almost down to Khartoum in Sudan, is the area of Nubia. That's a geographic designation. Overlaid on that is the political designation of Kush. So a kingdom that includes Kerma, Napata, which had the 25th dynasty that took over Egypt, and then finally Meroe. And all of those three kingdoms together can be referred to as Kush.
Kush. Okay. All right.
So I was going to say, in the third kingdom of Kush, Meroe, this period that's from about 300 BCE to 300 CE, there arise a series of incredibly powerful women, queens, who rule either as sole rulers, so Shana Daketo, Nawidamak, Amani Shaketo, or they rule in conjunction with their husband. Amanirenas ruled with her husband Taritakas, and Amanitore ruled with her husband Natakamani. But these 5 women are incredibly powerful. They assume sole rule of the country, and unlike in Egypt, they don't have to present themselves kind of as men, like we with Hatshepsut, she's shown wearing a beard and looking very just kind of masculine. Whereas in Kush, the women who took power, they're shown as very voluptuous, very feminine looking women, large women, which they may well have been. But it also is meant to convey the power of these women, the physicality, their large size is also to have you understand that these were powerful women to be reckoned with.
Wow. So talk a little bit more about that in terms of how would you could you like compare rights to Upper Egypt and the Kush area? Like how, in terms of the rights of women. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, we do see powerful women in Upper Egypt, and we do see a lot of collaboration between this area in southern Egypt with Kushites to the south. And so I wrote a paper about some queens of Mentuhotep II who are always shown with brown or sometimes even black skin in their burial shrines and on their coffins. And so to me, it seems fairly clear that these were Nubian queens of this Egyptian king. That's from the Middle Kingdom now, from way back then. But yeah, there are a similarity of rights. The thing is that in Egypt, it was very rare for women to rise to the power of a sole ruling queen. I believe there were 6 women in all of the 3,000 years of pharaonic rule in Egypt, that 3 women that ruled on their own.
Okay, so if you were going to be down in those times, you need to be in the Kushite. In the Kush area.
Kush was the place to be.
Yeah, Kush was the place to be. So you talked a little bit about the god wives of Amun. Can you just explain, what or who they were?
Yes. Yeah. So the god's wives of Amun. In Egyptian, it's Duat and Imen. And so the Duat is the worshiping. She is meant to be sort of that principal wife of the god, but also his primary worshiper. And this position starts in the very early 18th dynasty. This is what I'm talking about in the film. So Akhmosa Nefertari, who is one of the very early queens of the 18th dynasty, located in southern Egypt, in Upper Egypt, her husband creates this role for her, creates the second prophet of Amun as a position, and all of the income that is received by that position is due to her. So she now has her own individual source of income, right? Okay. So there's income, but she also has ritual roles that she carries out. And so this is a very powerful priestly office that is passed down often from mother to daughter, but it's passed down always through a woman's lineage. And so the very first one is Akhmosa Nefertari, but the next God's wife of Amun is Hatshepsut. And so we can see she starts off first as the God's wife of Amun, but that gives her, I believe, a boost of power and income to be able to claim the throne and be one of those 6 Egyptian queens who ended up being a sole ruler.
Wow. Okay. Wait. So after Hatshepsut, we just got to go all down the list. Okay. So after Hatshepsut.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Who's next? Because I saw her funerary temple when I was in Egypt as well. But so who was after her?
It's amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
She tried to have her daughter follow her. And so her daughter was given the title of God's wife of Amun. Neferure is the name of Hatshepsut's daughter. And it seems that Hatshepsut wanted her daughter to follow her on the throne. That, of course, didn't work out. So Thutmose III took over, and that really kind of changes the dynamic of female power in the Egyptian royal line. Because Hatshepsut's stepson, Thutmose III, saw he was almost pushed out of the succession, he made a point to really weaken the power of these God's wives of Amun. And so there's a bit of a hiatus. There are still women who hold this title, but they don't operate in anywhere near as powerful of a way. But it's very interesting that when the Kushites come into Egypt as the 25th dynasty, they are very eager to put their sisters and daughters in this role again. And so the Kushite king is now ruling over a unified kingdom, Nubia and Egypt. Oftentimes, if he was in Nubia, his daughter would be the God's wife of Amun in Thebes. And so she would be sort of the highest power in the land, representing her father to rule Egypt.
So, was that something that's interesting that you're talking about this? So when the king said, okay, he's going to be ruling both the whole upper, the upper, the lower, and Kush, and he's going to bring these, all of it. When he's going to bring these women, like you said, into these roles of power, was there any pushback, or was there any distension, or was it like, no, we don't want this, or was it just like, this is just what we're going to do?
I think that, as with so much in ancient Egypt, happens behind the scenes. So there's, not documentation about the any stress, but the way that a God's wife of Amun came into power is that she was adopted by her predecessor. And so we know the first Kushite God's wife of Amun was Amenertis, her name was, and she was adopted by her Libyan predecessor. So in the period before Kushite rule in Egypt, the Libyans were in control, and this, I think it was Shepenwepet was the predecessor. She was forced or convinced to adopt this Kushite princess as her successor, and that's the way that the handover of power happened.
Okay. And what other, I know you talked about it a little bit in terms of like what they got to do, and they perform lots of rituals. Like, can you kind of talk about more specifically, like what they did in terms of these rituals, and who did they do the rituals for or teach, or
the God's wives of Amun. The rituals, I love an image. So if for listeners and for yourself, Felicia, when you get back to Egypt next and you're in Thebes, when you go over to the west bank of the Nile where the Valley of the Kings and Deir el-Bahri, Hatshepsut's funerary monument is, if you go to Medinat Habu, it's called, there are chapels where the Kushite gods' wives of Amun are buried, and they're beautiful, very small structures. but they're there and you can look at them. And one of my favorite images is of Amenartis the first, because there was a second. Amenartis the first is making an offering before Amun, and she's holding out two jugs, which are exactly the same form as the Egyptian hieroglyph for milk. And so it's clear, and the textural, the inscription says she's making an offering of milk. In this case, to her mother. She's offering to the consort of Amun, Mut. So she's offering milk. But there would have been many libations poured. There are images showing them burning incense. Certainly music was always part of the ritual. And then less glamorous, there was a lot of financial management, because the temple of Karnak at Thebes was the wealthiest, the largest temple, and dedicated to the god Amun. So for the god's wife of Amun, being that highest ranking person in the temple, she would have overseen much of the finances.
She was kind of like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Wow. You know, this is so great to hear, because sometimes, you know, you look for inspiration and there's so much of the world that's telling you that you can't do this or you've never done this or whatever. And look, you have like this rich history. And this is like when people talk about the rich history, this is like what you're specifically talking about is the rich history.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I would like to add, if I may, that these, when the Kushites were expelled from Egypt, they didn't just go away. They continued ruling from their empire at Napata, which is near the sacred site of Jebel Barkal. And these Kushite kings kept, as they said, dedicating their sisters at the temples of Amun. And so it's something very similar to what we're calling God's wives of Amun. And they are shown playing the sistrum, this sort of rattle instrument that was sacred to the goddess Hathor, but at this point was used for worship before many of the gods and goddesses. And so this tradition continues down through Kushite history.
You know, why do you think there was a difference between how women were revered in Kush versus Egypt? Like, why do you think there was a difference?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I'm still kind of puzzling over it. I do feel like even in the inscriptions that I studied, there is a distinction between the centrality of women in Nubian culture. For example, in these inscriptions, in the meroitic language inscriptions that these Nubians left, they name always their mother first and then their father, and sometimes don't even mention their father, but their lineage is referring to who their mother was and their mother's mother. This is the way that Nubians trace their connection in society, whereas it's much more patriarchal in Egypt. And this might just be a geographic difference. It might be something that was more traditional for Egyptians in a period before the Pharaonic period, and they changed through contact with other more patriarchal cultures. I don't have a definitive statement. All I can say is to the south with the Nubians, the women have always been central organizers of society and centrally important to the culture. And of course, I love that best about Nubia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And so, but when you were doing your research, they, you know, even though women were very, you know, predominantly like leaders and all of that, but was there any like distinction between like them and men, or did they work like together? Like, was it an equal respect for each other? Like from their point of view, because it seems like from the man's point of view that they respected women, they you know, they did everything. But did women feel the same way about men?
Yes, I think that the understanding was that they are two complementary.
Complementary, I like that word.
parts of society, right? And this we see even in Egyptian society, the idea of ma'at, right? Everything needs to be kept in balance. And so this idea that the male needs the female needs the male. And so it's not that women were above men or more important, it's that they were one half of this really important complementary unit. I hope I explained that well.
No, yes, no, exactly. I was just, because it's very, like, I don't think that we can talk about like that time frame, anybody, and then not think about like currently what's happening right now with women. Like when you're talking about this, I'm like, wow, because there's a lot of things that worked for us in terms of like this ancient history that if we could possibly incorporate right now, that we can get to a different level. And I think this idea that you're talking about with a woman and a man working together and getting to the next level is really something that we should talk about and really aspire to, because it seems like when you're talking about this complementary, it's both like whole people coming together, not like, a broken person, another broken person, like trying to put together a one person, like, and so that's, this idea is very, gives me hope in a way.
I think it's something that we would do well to remember and try to incorporate more in our society. And so, Felicia, I wanted to go back and clarify that the women often, even in Nubia, we don't see them holding like government positions or positions outside of the home that much, except for, when they're going on to be powerful queens or sole ruling queens. But what we do see is a recognition of the centrality of women in a family, and then by extension, the extended family, and by extension, the community. And so it's not the way that we sometimes demean and disrespect somebody who's a housewife, but she was revered because she was the creator of life. She was the one through whom the next generation came. And that role for her was powerful enough that we see images of men making offerings before a woman sitting out in front of a temple. Like there was a sacredness for female sexuality and female reproductive ability. And that's something that I feel we've really lost, and everybody would be so much happier if we just brought it.
Well, let me tell you, listen, I'm hearing you talking, and I'm like, let me tell you something. When you have a baby, okay, and because one thing that I keep hearing from you is that, these women were revered, but they were also supported.
Yes.
It's something to be said about when you're in this position, you're very vulnerable. You feel, you just had a baby. You just don't know if you could do it. It's all these things that's going on in your mind. But to have that support really changes that changes everything. And it seems like this support that these women had wasn't just like from their husband. It was like the society supported them. Let me tell you that right there, we can definitely learn something from that.
Absolutely. And let me say, I am a lactation consultant, and so I'm always learning more about birth worker traditions. And I was blessed to sit in on an online training by a woman, a friend of mine who's from Zimbabwe, and she's talking about her Shona traditions. And she said, there is an allotted role for everyone in the extended family when a woman in that culture has a baby, that there is a circle of support around her. Even her support people have support people, and those roles are already set out. So nobody has to stop and think about what they're going to do when a woman brings a new life into the world. And man, we are so not doing that here, but that is really what a woman who has just brought forth a new life deserves. All of that care and reverence.
Yeah. And, and I'm just thinking, I had a couple of friends who had kids before me. So they kind of knew like what to do in a sense, like how to offer that support. And I'm hearing you, talk about this. It's more, I don't think people realize, like when you're saying you're bringing forth life, okay, but it's not also the bringing forth of life as to why you want to support. It's also, if you are supporting me, then I can be truly who I am, which is going to make it makes everyone happy. Like when everyone gets to be who they are, it's beautiful for the whole society. Like no one is, I think that this is definitely something that needs to be, I love that, like the extended family had a role. Like that's what's up. Like that's great,
And even for the new father, like his male relatives also would come and school him about how to take care of the.
Yes. Because this is the thing. Everyone thinks, see, the thing about this, like when you have a baby, everyone first thinks if you're a woman that you already know what to do. Okay. Right. And there's part of that, there's an instinct in you that yes, but you still need the support so that you can walk into that. It's not like the baby comes to you automatically, oh, I know everything. No, it's not like that. But sometimes we just think about like the women, okay, and then no one thinks about what's going on with the man, and that's just as important.
Absolutely.
Because now it's like it might have been just them. I mean, him and his woman, and now it's him, his woman, and a child. And psychologically, that's going on. Like it's something. So they also need support. Wow. Okay. Now wait. What culture is this again that your friend works for? Wait.
Shona culture from Zimbabwe.
Wow.
Yeah. It's powerful. And so that these kind of traditions live on elsewhere in Africa, but we can see indications of that in antiquity in Egypt and Nubia. And so it's that Sankofa, right? Going back and reclaiming those traditions that have worked for us forever. And I might just point out that what we have going on right here is not working for Black women having babies in this country. Our mortality rates are atrocious. And so, yes, we need more of that.
Yeah. Happy woman, happy everyone's life.
Amen.
Really. And so you're a lactation specialist. That's great.
Also.
So now, so what, in terms of like being a wet nurse, like how did that work like around, like along the Nile? Was that something that everyone, did, or, like did all the cultures embrace that, or was they like, we don't really want to do that? Like, how did that work?
Oh, that's a question I don't know anything about. You mean about nursing another woman's child?
Well, yeah, it was just how did they look at nursing? Like I feel like our culture is sort of getting back into nursing.
Yeah.
There was a time like my mom, she was like, oh no, I didn't nurse. I was like, what? Yeah. But before her, they did. And so I'm just wondering, like, how did that, just what did that look like in the, along?
Okay, now I've got your question. Yeah, so I was referring to Amun offering the milk to the goddess at her shrine in Medinat Habu. What I saw at Philae when I was looking at the Nubian inscriptions, after a while of walking around the temple and looking, I could see that they're clustering in certain areas of the temple. And one of them is a scene that refers very specifically to milk as a libation that should be poured. And they use specific Egyptian words. So hedjet to mean shining or white, nejmet to mean sweet, and waset to mean powerful. And so you can see that there is a power to give life that is understood to be inherent in the milk of a cow, but also of a nursing woman. And so what we see depicted at Philae is that Isis is taking her breast milk over to the burial site of her husband, which is on the nearby island of Biga, and it's being poured out as a libation as part of this resurrection process to bring him back to life. And so it is a very sacred substance, the milk of a cow or of a new mother. And there's an image that I love from a Kushite temple, so further south at a site called Naka, You see the goddess Isis depicted in larger than life size in very buxom Kushite proportions, not the more svelte Egyptian. And she's carrying a milk container, but it isn't just rounded at the bottom, but you can see that there's a nipple at the bottom of the container. So it is meant to evoke a breast. And so there's a lot of this kind of imagery of the power of milk, of breast milk, in terms of keeping alive an infant, but also mythologically and mystically of reviving the dead. I love that. I came across something I was reading about modern Nubian traditions from probably the, 1920s or so. There is a tradition among some Nubian groups that the widow is supposed to stay isolated for a certain amount of time. And then on a certain day, maybe day 6, she's to go to the funeral site of her husband and make some offerings. And one of the offerings that happens there is a milk libation is poured. And I thought, wow, that's ancient. And it still was traditional in the early 20th century among some Nubian groups. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yes. No, this is like, it's like sometimes, things are happening, and if we can't make the connection to the past, it makes us like second guess. And we spend so much time second guessing stuff. But if you know that this is how we operated, this is what made us strong, this is how we continue to work, it helps us like in our lives, like right now. It's like, wow, this is great. So now, one of the things you said, because, and you were so nice to correct my mistake when I said Isis and I called her a god. No, I know I called her a queen.
Oh.
Okay. So I want you to discuss the difference between like god and goddesses and like queens. Like just what those two things are. Okay.
Yeah. So in ancient Egypt, as in ancient Kush, there was a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, right? I could spend 20 minutes trying to name, and I'm sure but there were goddesses like Isis, Mut, Hathor, Nephthys.
And these were not real people, but they were principles that people aspired to. Okay.
Yes, and worshipped as gods, right? So within the temple, there would have been golden statues that would have been the figure of the god or goddess. They were taken in procession. They were clothed and given food and drink offerings. And so there was so many rituals associated with the gods and goddesses.
Was there anybody that was actually like a queen that then turned into a goddess? Like, was that something that or were goddesses always some people that were never like human?
I would say completely separate.
Okay.
We could say in Egyptian and Kushite tradition that the ruler is deified on their death, and offerings were made at their funerary temples, but that's still quite separate from being a god or a goddess.
Okay.
And so those goddesses that I just rattled off all the really long, confusing names of, those were actual living women. They have pyramid burial sites at the ancient location of Meroe. And so those were real living people.
Okay, so like Hathor and who else did you say?
Hathor, Isis, Mut, Kushite, Amasemi. Those are, they were never living people, but they were goddesses who were worshipped.
Okay, all right. So I was listening to you on someone else's show. Okay, I was going to say Philippe Matthews. I love Philippe Matthews. He is like the Oprah. Like, I think I read that about him, that he's the Oprah of the internet. He is such a good interviewer. Oh my gosh, you like his?
Yes, he is. That was my first, and he made it easy for me.
Yeah, but you were talking about Hathor, and you were saying like what she represented. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I will just say to start off, probably a lot of your listeners already know all of the names that I've been using are Greek interpretations of the actual Egyptian terms. So Hathor herself, her name in Egyptian is Hut-Her. That's something like the enclosure or the temple of Horus is what her name comes across in the Egyptian. She is the goddess of so many fun things, of music, of dance, of divine drunkenness, and of sexuality. And so she would have been very present at this party that I was talking about that the Kushites were throwing.
With a pound of gold.
Right, right. Oh, but Hathor also was the goddess of childbirth, so very much associated with the birthing woman, with providing protection for her. And even if you go to the temple of Philae, there's the main temple that's dedicated to Isis, but right in front of it is the so-called birth house. And along the side of the birth house, you can see 7 heads of Hathor. And from the very old kingdom, Hathor is understood as the 7 Hathors come at the birth of any child and foretell the future of this child. So this is part of Hathor being associated with childbirth as well.
Wow. Okay. So the kandakes. Am I saying that correct?
Kandakes.
Kandakes.
which is us just trying to pronounce a meroitic word that's just written Kdke. And so we have to just kind of figure out that it's kandake. The Greeks translated it as Candace, and so that's how we get that name Candace, but that's how they understood kandake. So this is a title held by these powerful meroitic queens. And it seems to have referred to their status as the queen mother. So they were the royal female, and it was only through her that the legitimate heir to the throne would be born. And so she was the queen mother of the legitimate king who would ascend to the meroitic throne.
Okay. Right. Let me tell you, you're doing Egyptology 101 with me right now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, this is good. It's coming together. Our audience is is very advanced. Okay. But this is good. So now, when you were let me make sure I got it right. Conductees.
Kandake.
Yeah. Kandake. Okay. So why were they important?
They were the creators, the birthers, if you will, of the legitimate next person to sit the throne. And so the queen mothers were essential in, of course, birthing and raising the king after them, but they were also, it seemed to be essential that they be present as their son was being crowned. So they were an important part of the coronation of their son. And so the Kushite king Taharka tells us that he had to wait for his mother to arrive at the site of his coronation because her presence was essential in order to speak for him to the god Amun, who was theologically considered to be the father of the ruling king. The queen mother had to come and say some ritual words to the god. She was presenting her son as the legitimate heir to the throne and asking the god's blessing for her son, in this case, Taharka, to ascend the throne. And we see this sort of power of the mother and the ruling king in the Egyptian iconography of Isis as the mother of Horus. Horus is manifested always in the king who's sitting on the throne of Egypt. And in fact, the name of Isis in Egyptian is Aset. And her name, I don't know if you've seen often the goddesses.
The crown, the disc with.
They wear the hieroglyph of their name on their head, and you can see it's a throne. And so her very name portrays her as the throne. So there's this kind of linking of the royal mother providing the throne and sort of supporting and surrounding, guiding the kingship of her son. So there's a lot wrapped up in there, but she is super important in bringing forth the next ruler.
Yeah, these are all principles we can use today. You know, right. I mean, the family unit seemed very much connected, but it also appears that everyone had a job, like everyone had a role that they liked to be in. Mm-hmm. You know, I just wonder, like, who, like, in terms of the meroitic women, you know, and you were saying that many of them were like in charge of like their home, and you know, like they were very much into like domestic type things, right? So I wonder, how did they make the jump from then, you know, wanting to be a queen? You know, like, was that, you know, did they have to, was that just anybody could be a queen? Or, okay, so part of the lineage of queen.
This royal family, right? So you're born into the royal family. And some woman who probably was in the lineage of royal women would then be married to the king. And yes, so it was not a flexible, mobile society.
You had to be born into it.
Mobility. You had to be born into that family. But we do see, like, even in the provinces, there's this gorgeous bowl found in a place in Nubia called Karanog that shows a woman. She might be like a local royalty, but she's clearly somebody who has status, who is sitting in front of a small circular hut, but in a shape that is very much reminiscent of a traditional temple that I've seen images of from Ethiopia. And so she's sitting there like a priestess receiving offerings that are being poured out in front of her. So even when women weren't born into the royal family from Meroe, and maybe they were simply homemakers and mothers, they still could function in roles as priestesses and receive these honors and offerings made to her. And so it's a very different way to think about it. If you just think homemaker, that's not encompassing all of the role of the women in this society.
Yeah. Listen, that's a no. That job or that role is it takes so many different skill sets. Like it's you know, just to say, you know, like you said, just to be like a homemaker. No. Like running a house is no joke.
And it's central to a healthy society.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you don't have a happy, healthy home and a very interconnected, extended family that is the framework for a healthy society, then things are not working right. And people understood that in this civilization when these Nubians are writing about their social connections. That for them is the most important thing. They are talking about the important administrative and priestly roles that they hold, but they're also talking about their social connections to other people in their larger extended family, and that seems to be a central organizing principle of Nubian culture.
Yeah. Wow. You know, it's so nice to be in a place where you're respected and where you can just be who you were sent here to be. You know, I think that's really the dream for everybody. And if it's not, it should be. That should be everyone's dream, is to know why they were sent here and know that they were sent here for a purpose.
I agree. And to live as a woman in a society that honors and respects women.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because, I don't think everyone needs to understand that if I feel respected, then I will make sure that you feel respected. It's a mutual gain for everyone. It really is, and I like a lot, how you were saying that men and women complemented each other, because that's the other thing. Sometimes it's really hard to do things when it's just you. If you have like another person that's just as committed and that's just as whole as you are, then you can do anything. Like literally, you can do anything.
Yeah.
So that's.
And then multiply that out to the society, to then a completely healthy, functioning society.
Yeah. And where we, at this point, we wouldn't be able to, we wouldn't be oppressed because we wouldn't tolerate it. And we would have these communities where it wouldn't even matter what's going on over there, because our stuff would be popping and we would be dropping the gold like the king did.
That's right.
Like that right there. Just wow. Like, okay. And wait, what was this king's name? It was just a king, or did you remember who he was?
I do remember his name. It's a mouthful. His name was Mani.
Wow.
And we know this is one of the few of these inscriptions that are actually dated. So it's 253 AD. This inscription was left on April 10th of 253 AD.
Wow.
And so, this king was very devout, and he was sending his political representative, but he came with a whole entourage. So there were priests, there were administrators of meroitic Nubia. They just came in a posse. And so you can sort of imagine this. I like to add that on the front of the pylon at Philae, there's a Greek inscription, either an Egyptian writing in Greek or a Greek visitor just marveling at the ships that were coming down from Nubia, right? The Nile flows from south to north. And so these Nubian groups of really powerful, very wealthy representatives of the Meroitic king were arriving on their amazing ships and literally bringing with them pounds and pounds of gold, but also people. The Nubians say all of the inscriptions were left by men, but these men talk about them having their entire community with them. And they talk about performing rites in front of their daughters or bringing donation to the priest at Philae, conceivably Egyptian priests, and that they are also making donations on behalf of the daughters of the priests. And so it's like this whole family affair that's happening. You don't imagine just like one or two priests showing up, but groups of 10, 40 people showing up to undertake music and dance in the forecourt, and then the priests going into the temple and performing these sacred rites within the temple.
Wow.
Yeah.
They were partying up, and they brought the priest.
I would have loved to be there for one of those parties, I gotta tell you.
Just like, when you were talking about them coming down the Nile, I was just like, wow, like that would have been such, a sight to see.
Yes.
Wow, they were just partying. Okay, so everyone, if you have any questions for Dr. Ashby, please send them now. And I have a couple more questions. In fact, okay, before I get to my questions, I do have someone's texted me a question, so I'm just going to read this question from you. How did the ships laden with goods pass or transverse the cataracts in the Nile? Okay, wait, what are cataracts?
Okay, that's a great question. So
I know the answer to that.
Right, a term Egyptologists use without even assuming everyone understands it. It just means rocks that are blocking the passage in the Nile, and there are 6 of them that were so disruptive that Egyptians or Kushites had to take their boats out and literally portage them around that area and then back into the Nile again. The thing about the Temple of Philae is that it is on the southern side of the first cataract. And so Nubians would have been able to sail down the Nile from as far as the second cataract, which is quite a ways south of the Temple of Philae. And so they wouldn't have had to deal with the first cataract because that was north of the temple.
Okay.
Yeah. So to answer the question, they would have taken the ships out of the river and carried them beyond, portaged them.
Okay. I'm just like trying to imagine, like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What? Wow.
A lot of labor, but maybe they were smaller ships, you know, because they would have come in groups. That I don't know much about. But I do think it's really telling that the Temple of Philae is built on the south side of the first cataract. It's in the center of the Nile. It's facing south. And so to me, that just says it is, its intended visitors are the Nubians who are coming from the south. And apparently it's right around a bend of the Nile. So it would have made a dramatic appearance for the Nubians as they were coming down the river and then coming around a bend. All of a sudden, there's an island in the center of the Nile and this temple rising up on it.
Wow. Yeah, that's wow. So now, all right. So B-Man has another question. He wanted to know right there, what is the most surprising thing that you learned about the Egyptians and the Nubians?
Surprising, huh? How they interacted, intermarried, culturally cross-pollinated throughout all of Egyptian and Nubian history. I don't know if that's necessarily surprising per se, but I feel like as somebody who has spent now 2 decades studying the Nubians, that I can see them everywhere in Egyptian history. And so they're very much present as collaborators in the history of ancient Egypt.
Yeah, okay. And, you know, my question is kind of like on this line, but not in terms of like when you were doing this research, even, you know, you got to school and you were like, you're going to do this, you're 12 weeks pregnant. What did you learn about like yourself? Like, was there anything that you saw over there and you're like, oh God, this is something that I need? Or, you know, like was there any, you know, anything like that or any epiphany you had?
From that resonated with me that I found in my studies.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly as a person who was going through labor, delivery, and breastfeeding my children and raising young boys, I loved when I had that epiphany about the sacredness of motherhood in ancient Egypt and then in Nubia, and even more precisely the sacredness of the milk. So that I loved, and just like the power and presence of women in this culture.
Yeah, you know, that's awesome.
I feel like due to the fact that I was a new mother in the middle of trying to absorb all of this intellectual stuff, that it just really drew my attention to this information about motherhood, about cow goddesses, about the birth of the divine child, Isis giving birth to Horus. That was a theme for me.
Yeah. You know, I was just thinking when you were talking, like when you said about the milk libations, and I just think about, there were so many times when I was nursing that, particularly with my second child, because like the first child, it was just like wet nurse, just milk for days. But the second child, it was a little challenging in the beginning. And I know just to fill up that little bottle, I would be like, yes. And this is like the way I would open the refrigerator and see that milk. I'm like, yes. You know, but to know, you know, like that, it's just like when you were saying it, I was thinking about how I worship my milk. You know, it's just to, you know, be able to produce it.
It's a sacred substance. And as a lactation consultant, I can say it's got all kinds of magical ingredients in there that there's no way you're going to replicate with formula. So it really is a sacred substance.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Dr. Ashby, you've been a treat. And I'm telling everybody that's looking at this right now, got to get your tickets. Dr. Ashby, she holds down the first third of the film, you know, talking about all of this in more detail with pictures, with beautiful pictures, you know, that were her backdrop. Get your tickets this Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and following the film, everybody gets a ticket to the exclusive panel discussion with a bunch of the cast members. Make sure you go to hapifilm.com after you get your tickets, sign up for our newsletter. You know what, Dr. Ashby, do you have any shout outs you want to give before I give mine?
Shout outs. I did want to say, yes, so the beautiful imagery. I was so happy that Taki brought me to Egypt to do the interview. He said, would you mind if we? And I thought, is this a question? So we got to film at Philae, which was really lovely. And then he wanted to go back and get some more footage. And so we filmed at the Giza pyramids, which was also amazing. So there is some gorgeous footage in the documentary.
Yeah, you know, I came into it after you had already shot yours, but I remember when I was looking at it, I was like, wow, you guys were there? Like, was she just there? He's like, no, we brought her there. I was like, wow, like, what? Like, that's incredible.
That was such a treat.
Yeah, and for anybody that don't know, you can go to HAPI Tours, because Taki Grant has been doing tours to Egypt for over like 20 years. It was like the real deal. We are going back in February, so you know, definitely you can get some more information about that. See all the places that you're going to learn about when you buy your ticket for HAPI Film premiere on Saturday. I thank you again. You know, this is like so awesome because you are like one of two right now. You know, Black Egyptologists, like that is so wild, and you get like your own HAPI Talk. So that's what's up.
Oh my gosh! But there are more coming shortly. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. I love it. Okay. All right. So if you could just hang out in the green room for a minute, and I'm just gonna do our little closing. Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank
you. So everybody again, go to hapifilm.com, get your ticket. It's at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. After that, you will have a panel discussion at 9:30. You will get a link email to the same email address that you use to buy your ticket. You will send a link for the panel discussion at 9 o'clock. Please go to hapifilm.com to get your ticket and sign up for our newsletter. But this is like, I'm going to release some new news. We always love releasing new news. So tomorrow, we're not going to HAPI Talks. However, we are still going to be very interested. Anthony Browder sat down and spoke with Taki Grant, which is the director, producer, writer of HAPI. Everybody knows HAPI. So they did this incredible interview that we're going to show tomorrow at 7 p.m. And you have to go to YouTube, and you have to go to Anthony Browder's YouTube site, his channel, to check it out. It's at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Make sure that you check that out. It's going to be marvelous. Also, after you look at that, we'll be back on Thursday with a new HAPI guest. So thank you very, very much. Enjoy and peace.